Hello everyone and welcome to another News Coolum video. I'm just up here checking out our local lake, seeing the fire damage and maybe do a little bit of fishing while I'm up here after work, but I didn't have a lot of time to cover this, and in fact I don't think I did an official video on it, which is unfortunate because I'm calling it now. I think the GM Gotion partnership is pretty much 100% certified at this point. And if you don't know what I'm referring to, about a year ago, maybe a little bit more than that, about a year and a half ago, Gotion, a battery producer out of China, announced that they were working with a U.S. automaker traded on the public stock exchange at that time, which is a very important point because at that point, the only major automakers trading on the U.S. Stock market were Ford, GM, and Tesla. Lucid hadn't done their IPO yet. Rivian hadn't done their IPO yet. And so basically, once that was announced, what Gotion announced is that they would be delivering 200 gigawatt hours of lithium iron phosphate batteries to that unnamed U.S. automaker for auto manufacturing and possible grid tie storage and other applications, sundry applications. And 200 gigawatt hours is a lot, right? That's enough that if you were averaging 80 kilowatt hours per battery pack, significantly more than what's in the Bolt EV, about the same as, say, the Tesla Model 3, right, or Tesla Model Y, that 80 kilowatt hour battery pack, you could make 2.5 million of them with those 200 gigawatt hours of battery cells that Gotion was going to be delivering. Now, they weren't delivering it all at once. It wasn't just dumping it into the market, but they were delivering them over a span, I think, of like 4 years, 5 years, something like that, from, I think, 2023 or 2024 through like 2028, something like that. That's a lot of batteries, though, regardless. And then with it would be a joint partnership. Now, when that news was announced, all of the Tesla fans, all of them, just jumped on it. Gotion and Tesla partnering, Gotion and Tesla partnering. And I kept saying, hey, look, this actually might be more likely GM, right? It could be Ford, but it's more likely GM. And the reason I was saying that, of all of the U.S. automakers trading on the U.S. stock exchange at that time, the major automakers, only one was already doing business with Gotion in China. And that was GM. Now, the counterpoint was, oh, well, GM1 isn't interested in building that many EVs. They've shown no interest in LFP, whereas, Tesla on their battery day was talking about nickel batteries and iron batteries, all of that. Well, Tesla was very open about whose technology they were relying on, right? Who they were licensing technology from. Oh, we're going with CATL, we're going with Panasonic, we're going with all of these other companies that they were working with or whose technology that they were using or incorporating into their batteries. So why not mention Gotion at that time? Ford, the same thing. Ford has shown an inclination toward LFP, but that actually came later. And in fact, I think this Gotion deal might have prompted Ford because, one, they knew they needed larger battery supplies. Two, they're sort of balancing different chemistries. But I think also they looked at that contract and said, this is a major U.S. automaker getting 2.5 million EVs worth of batteries from this company, plus a joint venture where Gotion is bringing manufacturing to the United States. They're like, well, we know it's not us. So it has to be someone else. So then all of a sudden you see Ford really pushing their contracts for LFP and joint partnerships in the United States as well. So Ford has been doing a very good job also of just sort of following GM's lead in EVs while crediting Tesla. And that does two things in Ford's benefit. It, one, follows what I consider one of the better EV strategies. The only thing that's really left for them to do following GM is putting a large chunk of funding into the public charging infrastructure. I really think that they should consider partnering with EVgo as well. But also it gets the Tesla fans off their back. VW has been trying this, right? By speaking nicely about Elon, it gets the Tesla fans sort of backing off on VW so they can kind of do their own thing. It's worked wonderfully for Ford also. So they get to, start doing their dealership conversion, the same sort of deal that GM handed out to their Cadillac dealerships, those sorts of things. So Ford is really sort of following GM's strategy in this, and that's not a bad thing, right? I don't consider this a negative at all. Again, also, I don't mean this to take credit away from Ford. Ford is doing a great job. And I think they're following a strategy that makes maybe the most logical sense for an established U.S. automaker. Again, though, then you'd say, well, if Tesla and if Ford were both just open about who they were partnering with, and who they were buying LFP battery cells from or whatnot, why not GM? Well, keep in mind, at the time that this deal was announced, GM was embroiled with a big issue with LG, and I guess now LG Energy Solutions with the Chevrolet Bolt EV battery pack. And two things came out of that. One, I think it was a wake-up call for GM because their joint venture in Ultium is with LG. So right now they're sort of a one-trick pony in terms of who they're getting their cells from, battery cells from for U.S. automakers. So that's already at single point of failure. If that business partnership dissolves, something happens to LG, GM is up a creek in terms of what their established supply chains and plans are for EV production. So it just made sense to broaden their scope. But LG has kind of shown a tendency to push back on partners who have started to try to partner with other battery producers. And we've seen some of the negativity that's come out of LG. So I could already see that. But again, they're in the middle of this heated business negotiation. So GM recognizes that they need an additional battery supplier, that one isn't good enough. They realize that the nickel batteries used in the Chevrolet Bolt EV and the nickel batteries that are used in their NCMA chemistry for the first generation Ultium cells, basically most automotive batteries in the United States, are highly volatile, highly flammable, and it's a risk, right? Whereas LFP, the electrolyte is flammable, but you're not going to have the same thermal runaways. It's nowhere near as dangerous. And so they also recognized that. And then, like I said, so they are also not free to really talk about it because of this working out this joint venture with LG. Well, at this point, they're so far into that joint venture with LG that backing out of Ultium would irreparably hurt LG. And then LG is still on the hook for, my battery still has not been replaced yet, right? I have a 2017 Chevrolet Bolt EV with over 155,000 miles on the original battery. It still hasn't been replaced. LG is still on the hook for replacing a bunch of batteries, almost $2 billion that they're having to pay GM basically to refund them or recoup them for the cost of this whole recall. So LG is already on a sort of tightrope. Plus, they're already building, the third Ultium factory with plans already in place for the fourth Ultium factory or establishing. So LG is already committed, right? They're not going to back out of this joint venture. So at this point, GM's free to say, oh yeah, by the way, fifth factory from a joint venture now being built in Big Rapids by Gotion, a partner that we've been working with in China. Now they're bringing their LFP cell manufacturing to the United States. Those vehicles are still going to be eligible for all that new federal tax credit, all the federal tax incentives, and it gives them really cheap, really safe batteries that are going to allow them to keep manufacturing entry-level vehicles like the Equinox EV, maybe the base Blazer EV, maybe bringing back the Chevrolet Bolt EV or rebadging it or renaming it in some way. So this makes sense on so many levels for GM. And again, when you say, oh, GM has no need for grid-tie energy storage, that's also not true. One of the technologies that GM is really involved in is hydrogen fuel cell technology. Their Hydrotech is one of the premier hydrogen fuel cells in the world. And they probably logged more testing miles on their Equinox hydrogen fuel cell vehicles than most other automakers have done in testing of hydrogen fuel cells. And so they already have these fuel cells that they've been also using for grid tie, possible off-grid charging locations. These hydrogen fuel cells, when they did their GMC Hummer EV event, they actually had those HydroCheck, I think they call them MPG, fuel cell arrays with a 150 kilowatt charger hooked up. That's what they were using to charge up their GMC Hummer EVs at that event. So GM has need for these LFP batteries as grid tie or off-grid energy solutions as well. And then the fact is, like I mentioned, this new plant, basically Gotion has now spilled the beans. Their joint venture partnership is in Big Rapids, just north of Grand Rapids in Michigan. If you look at the map of Michigan, that's like dead center with a bunch of different GM assembly facilities and assembly plants and automotive plants just kind of built in a ring around it. You can't pick a better location for a battery cell plant that's going to be supplying these different GM assembly plants. So I have to call it. I was right. The Tesla fans were wrong. It's a GM Gotion battery deal joint venture. We're probably even going to hear this maybe folded under the Ultium brand or some Ultium adjacent. Remember, they were very clear. Ultium is chemistry agnostic. That means that they can use the SES solid lithium metal battery cells. They can use NCMA chemistry. They can use older NCM chemistry, and they can use LFP chemistry, or they can use any other chemistry that happens to come to market that makes sense for an electric vehicle. So I'd love to hear what you think. Did you see this coming? Have you been pushing back on all of the fans proclaiming victory because there's now an additional 200 gigawatt hours of LFP battery capacity going to their favorite automaker, whoever that might be? If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. It really helps out the channel. And thank you for watching. And I got to get to the lake.